Welcome, everybody. For those of you who are already tuning in, we're going to give it a little bit of time till everybody is gathered. But good afternoon. We're excited for you to be here. Welcome again, everybody. We're just going to wait one more minute and then we will get started. Thanks for joining us. All right, Rebecca, do you want to lead us off?
I do. Thank you, Alyssa. Welcome, everybody. I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships for the Lake County Forest Preserves. I'm really happy to welcome you all here to our 2021 Ethel Untermyer Conservation Forum, Building with a Light Touch. I have the true pleasure of introducing my friend Amy and her husband Joe. Amy and Joe and I go way back. I think this is our 9th Ethel Untermyer Conservation Forum. And I want Amy to please tell you all why we are celebrating Ethel Untermyer today and why we celebrate her every year. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Amy. Can you give us a few words?
Sure, Rebecca, that's so sweet of you. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with the Lake County Forest Preserve District, even though today I'm dialing in. My heart is in Lake County with you, her beautiful woodlands, prairies, and waterways, forever preserved for us all. It is in the spirit of this special moment that I have sponsored events in my mother's name, joining you from San Rafael, California, where I teach and work to preserve the past and conserve the future, as did both of my parents, Frank and Ethel Untermyer. You know my mother is the founder of the Lake County Forest Preserve District and a courageous young mother. Ethel was from Chicago, where as a young girl she lived in a Cook County Forest Preserve District, where her bohemian father Joseph served as a warden. She came from immigrant stock and fresh out of college, Roosevelt University, where my father taught, and she knew the value of a natural environment amidst crowded dwellings. In 1957-58, she banded together with conservationists across the political spectrum, from Edward L. Ryerson, John Peary, to hardworking volunteers like Gladys Roper, whom we remember today. And they won the first Forest Preserve District referendum. Many, many friends, old and young, sent mailings, knocked on doors, attended meetings, and worked at the county fair booth to pass the first referendum, which started the preservation work in your county, saving land for future generations for the public from developers' shovels. My mother continued working on referenda and outreach throughout her 84 years. Gladys was always by her side. The Forest Preserve District has recognized Ethel many times, eventually naming a preserve after her, Ethel's Woods, now naturalized from a farmer's field to its proper state. Ethel and Frank built our prairie home in 1951 with the same light touch her Conservation Forum addresses today. Their 5 children grew up knowing the magic of moss under bare feet, spring beauties and wild violets under sugar maples, and in the winter skating in the swamp amidst the frozen cattails. I long for those moments regularly, especially, as you can imagine, when I read about your rain and storms like today. Rebecca Snyder, Nan Burkhart, Alyssa Freikas, and Anissa Chowdhury are your visionary and hardworking Forest Preserve public servants who, with their teams of ecologists and volunteers, bring natural delight to us all. I thank them and look forward to learning from today's innovative forum and the distinguished panel. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Amy. Amy and Joe, thank you very much for making this possible. Every year you give us a really lovely gift, and it supports the Ethel Untermyer Conservation Forum. And I think every year we strive to have a topic that really speaks to Ethel's leadership and spirit and vision. And I'm really excited about today. So why don't we just turn it over back to Alyssa, who's going to get the webinar started. Thank you again, Amy and Joe.
Thank you all for that beautiful introduction. Without further ado, my name is Alyssa Freikas. I'm the education manager at the Lake County Forest Preserve. And while I'm going to give you a couple quick technology tips and Zoom tricks, I'm going to launch a quick poll. And while I do this, if you could just indicate how many people are tuning in from your device, this helps us give us a good idea of how many people that we've reached today. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to go over a couple Zoom tips. So the question and answer, you might notice there's a question and answer section. This will be where you're going to put any questions that you have from today's conversation. We'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. If you're having any technology problems, please feel free to use that chat feature. Because we're using a webinar, you might notice that you don't have a camera or a microphone. So that's just how the webinars run. So you can't turn on your microphone or you can't turn on your camera, but we do still want to hear from you. So again, feel free to use that chat feature or that question and answer button. And that's what we'll be utilizing to make sure that everybody is getting their questions answered. And so I'm going to keep they're still coming in here. So thank you all for responding to that. All right. And let me introduce today's topic. So today we're going to be talking all about sustainable design. Sustainable design is the intention to reduce or eliminate all negative impacts on the environment and make sure that the occupants are as healthy as possible. Some ways that we do this is we look at the best site potential. We minimize non-renewable energy consumption. We protect and conserve water. We optimize operational and maintenance practices, and many other ways. Today's panelists, which I'll introduce in just a minute, are going to provide varying perspectives, and they're experts in their field. So I'm very thrilled that they were all able to join us. We've got Steve Dowd. He's our building performance project manager from Affiliated Engineers. We've got Becky Mathis. She's our very own landscape architect from the Lake County Forest Preserve. We've got John Millade. He's the Director of Sustainability and Healthy Environments with White and Company. So again, we have 3 experts with varying perspectives that are going to help us give us a broad understanding of sustainable design. So without further ado, we'll start off with our first question. All right. So why is sustainable design important to you? And we're going to start off with John for this one.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today, Amy. That was just beautiful prose. If I could only be so as eloquent as you were describing the importance of the forest preserve. That was really nice to hear. Sustainability, a lot of times when we hear about it, you hear about issues of sustainable design. And broadly, that might be materials conservation or energy conservation, water conservation. But really, those aren't issues of sustainable design. Those are issues in conventional design. They're issues because of the model of business as usual. And sustainability really unlocks the solution set. And so it's really exciting and a really powerful space to be in. We've done a really good job disconnecting ourselves from the natural world, from nature. But we have to remember that, we are all connected. We are very much part of nature. And so with sustainable design, we can start to foster those connections again. We're bringing nature into buildings. We're blurring the lines so our buildings are more outside. We use concepts such as biophilia, which is our inherent love and affiliation for the natural world, that helps us live more healthy and more happy lives. And so, with sustainable design, it's really the promise and the prospects of that better future that inspires me.
So yeah, if I could go next. Yeah, this one was a little bit tricky. It seems like a really simple question. What does sustainability mean to you? And at the risk of being generic, I come back to, I have 2 daughters now, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I think a big part of being a parent, as I'm learning, still have a lot to learn, is wanting more for your kids. And also wanting, tied in with that, not wanting to have them foot the bill for your decisions. So I think it's a big part of what I want to do going forward, and what I think we have to do is make it possible for them to have a sort of more equitable, sustainable world. I don't want them footing the bill for our decisions or our lack of foresight. So much like my dad, didn't go to college and he wanted me to go to college as a result. I look forward to the idea of fixing some of these issues and not burdening my children with maybe some of our missteps. So I think that's really what it means to me.
And, I grew up in the country and I spent a lot of time like playing in creeks and building forts and doing all that sort of stuff. To me, I think it's really important that my kids still have that opportunity to get in touch with the dirt, to get in a little bit of trouble in a place where it's safe to do so. I want for there still to be, like crickets and frogs and all of these wildlife that they find, and they just have a really deep and rich experience and a connection to a natural world that I just think is so important. And, that is in large part why I do the work that I do today as a landscape architect.
Thank you all. Those are great responses. I'm actually going to jump to the third question, Becky, just because you kind of already touched on that. I'm going to start off with many people, when hearing the term sustainable design, they think about the built environment. How does the planning of green spaces fit into sustainable design? And when you do that, can you highlight some of our current forest preserve projects that we're doing right now?
Absolutely. I think that green space is just as important, if not even more. Right now, we're doing several large-scale restoration projects. One of the big ones is at Lakewood, which is one of our largest forest preserves. And we're looking at completely redoing the recreational core, adding more trails, restoring the native landscape. And then we're also doing a couple different projects, that are really important for the conversation today. So at Lakewood, we're planning on doing a net zero maintenance facility. And then at Ryerson, we're planning on building a new environmental education facility that will also be net zero. So as an organization, we just think it's so important for us as a conservation agency to really be leaders in terms of sustainable design. And so it was really important when we decided that we had a need for these new buildings, that we went along and we made sure that we got net zero building certification. One of the things about these buildings is, they're with building design and construction, there's an initial investment, and then there's this long-term investment to take care of the property. And then there's also this human investment of all of the people who are interacting with it, engaging it, and also caring for it. In our opinion, the initial investment is really the smallest amount. And so us doing this right and doing it right the first time is extremely important to us. These buildings that we're looking at are going to be forever buildings. We plan on keeping them and taking care of them forever for the people of Lake County. So that's extremely important. I do want to highlight one of our largest green space projects that we've done recently, and I think it's really fitting because I want to highlight Ethel's Woods Forest Preserve in Antioch. I'm going to try and share my my screen now, so bear with me as I pull this up. Oops. Okay. Mute it. So Ethel's Woods is a recent restoration project. And so this video, which is on our YouTube channel, it cycles between the before images, which were in spring of 2018, and then the after images, which is in autumn of 2019. Before we began restoration, the 58-acre Rasmussen Lake was ranked as the second worst of the 162 lakes in the county for water quality, largely due to the accumulation of deep deposited sediments over the years when North Mill Creek was impounded by an earthen dam. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency classified Rasmussen Lake as an impaired lake, and it was completely non-supportive for aquatic life or recreation. After years of study, the Lake County Forest Preserve Board decided to abandon the lake, modify the dam, and restore the stream. A team of engineers, geomorphologists, and an ecologist developed a restoration plan using a natural channel design that mimicked the historic pre-dam alignment. The 1.5 mile restored stream has connected floodplains with native riparian vegetation. Over 500 acres of natural area restoration was completed, including 170 acres of high-quality oak hickory woodlands. A new 1.5 mile trail connects to the regionally significant Millennium Trail and has views of the rolling topography and the oak hickory complex. The project reduces expensive man-made stormwater infrastructure and relies on natural systems to reduce flooding, which improves water infiltration and water quality. The project removed hundreds of acres of invasive species and replaced it with climate change adaptive natives, prairies, wetlands, and woods, all which support a diversity of insects, birds, fish, and wildlife. It also reintroduced fire as a management strategy, which improves the ability of oaks and other species to regenerate naturally, improving floodways, increasing wetland complexes, supporting decomposition, improving carbon storage, increasing pollinator species. The list of ecosystem benefits this project provides is extensive.
Thank you, Becky. That was great. Steve or John, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I just continue to be impressed as we talk about these projects. I'm just honored to be a part of it. We're doing the design on the new Ryerson Education Facility, and it's just a pleasure to work with people who are this focused on sustainability. A lot of times people say they are, but it's not like this. It's just, it's really powerful to see the focus, and it's for real. And I'm just happy to be a part of it.
I think it's
great.
really
You know,
time. Oh, sorry, John. I think
Well-
it's really timely. I'm just going to mention really quick that today there was an article that was run in the New York Times all about the Lake County Forest Preserve and their commitment to their net zero buildings. And so if you have a chance to check out that article, I've been told that it's running today. So we're really, really proud of that.
Yeah, I would just add this notion of green infrastructure. It's rare that we have the opportunity in our neighborhoods to restore on such a massive scale. But the opportunity does exist to bring it down on small scale in our backyards or on a simple street or the alley projects in Chicago, because nature does things in a very elegant way. I think that we can both learn from and leverage.
And with that being said, John, one of White and Company's commitments is to offer clients the most effective, sustainable solutions. How do you measure the environment efficacy in projects? What are the most common barriers to sustainable design, and how do you overcome them?
These are really good questions. And if there was a single solution, a silver bullet, I think a lot more projects would be pursuing net zero energy or net zero water types of goals. White and Company is an integrated delivery firm. And so we've got the architecture, engineering, construction, all of the disciplines under one roof. And so we've got a tremendous opportunity to be able to hit on all cylinders, coordinate between the teams, and really leverage that communication and that in-house knowledge to move projects forward. How do we measure how well we did is important because, there are tools, green building rating systems. LEED, I think, is probably the most pervasive. But the Living Building Challenge, Zero Energy, Passive House, the Well Building Standard, and all of these frameworks really serve the client as a quality control mechanism. And so that with a third-party audit, the environmental or health benefits of your project are at least reviewed by an independent party to assure that you're getting what you wanted to get to begin with. And so, even our projects that don't pursue an independent rating system, White Company has an internal standard called the White Sustainability Standard that's applied to all of our projects that addresses the EUI or the energy intensity of the project, addresses materials and construction and all of that. So I think, with that, one of the barriers, I think, within the industry is, a lack of, I think there are pressures around being profitable. I mean, everybody wants everything, but you get what you pay for, essentially. And so, we try to provide value and kind of tunnel through that cost barrier. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of firms that, you're not in the business to lose money. We want to provide a great design and a great project for a client. But there's a lot of pressures with time and with money and everything else on projects that it's easy for project managers and other design team members to lose sight of the goal. And so I think that's both a challenge in the industry, but also an opportunity to help bring that inspiration to every meeting and bring that inspiration and vision, I think, and check in on it regularly throughout the process.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on that real quick, and maybe it's a lead into the next issue, but with these goals, where you can have like a lead standard or goals that are come up with and refined over time, when you go with something like net zero and metered net zero, it becomes very, very fixed and it becomes very, very focused. So that's what the Ryerson Education Facility is pursuing. So it's very, very prescriptive. You will be metered net zero or bust. So it's very money where your mouth is, less of a standard, more of just let's check the tape. We're either net zero or we're not. And so it's really where the rubber meets the road.
Our project specifically at Ryerson, I think one of the really great things that we're doing is we're pursuing a lot of different grants. So because it is challenging to take this initial investment to go net zero, we're really looking to fund about a third of it from taxpayer dollars through the capital, our capital improvement fund. We're looking at hopefully getting a third of it through private donations and a third of it through federal, state, and local grants. We're looking at the Clean Energy Foundation, Community Foundation grant. And one of the really great things that they have as a part of that grant, we have to pick one of two different net zero certifications, and we're going with the FIAS model, which is Passive House. And a part of that too is there's this period at the end for a year to make sure that the building is actually in compliance with what is said. And so for us as the owners of the building, that's a really great thing for us because it makes sure that what we say we're going to build is what we're going to get. And then we can also maintain it in the way that it's supposed to be maintained.
Perfect lead into the next question, Steve. So the forest preserves are anticipating adding a new net zero building to Ryerson Woods, which we've mentioned. Can you explain how a building can be net zero or even net positive?
Yes, sure. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen now. Does it look all right?
Looks good.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think net zero is a big topic, but I think it's coming up more and more. So I think first off is identifying what we mean by net zero, because it can mean a lot of different things. So net zero can mean net zero energy, net zero carbon, net zero water. But in very basic terms, it just means net over the course of a year, you're going to average zero. So basically you have to generate all of your electricity over the course of a year that you're going to consume at the building. So you net zero. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're off the grid. But it does mean that over the course of a year, you're going to average producing as much energy as you consume or producing as much water as you consume. So you're at net zero. So in our case, we're talking about net zero energy. So how we do that is we look at building. This is Ryerson. We're doing conceptual modeling. We're playing around with different size floor plates. And what we get is our energy consumption. And this is called EUI, it's our energy use intensity. So this is how much energy we're using per square foot of a building. So we play around with this, we play around with the size of the building, figure out how much energy we're going to need to, how much energy we're consuming. And then once we know that, we can switch gears to, how are we going to make up for that energy? In this case, it's solar. So we can add solar panels. We'll check off these guys first. We watch our EUI go from a positive number, and as we keep adding these arrays, we're very, very close. And now we're at a negative EUI. That means that we're net zero. So that means in this configuration, if we add in all these solar arrays, we're going to produce more energy that the building is going to consume over the course of the year. So that's really what the focus is on. I think Ryerson takes it even a step further. You could have net zero energy, but you could still have combustion on site. So take your house, for example. If you have a gas-fired furnace and you have electricity, you could theoretically generate as much electricity as the energy you consume. You'd still be, having combustion in your gas-fired furnace. So Ryerson takes it a step further, and there's no combustion on site. So there's no carbon footprint on site as well. So again, net zero can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So I think just getting, specifically what we're after. In our case, it's net zero energy. And yeah, it's fun to do, and as we said before, it really is. It's going to be really fun, kind of terrifying, but fun to check the tape and see how we did. So we'll know very, very shortly.
To add on to that, so in addition to pursuing, I guess, a part of the way that we're doing net zero is really to have the most robust envelope system. And so what we're able to do as a part of the Passive House is really look at things that are going to make it easy for us to maintain. So by having a really great envelope system, we're not getting air that's leaking out through our windows and through our doors. We're not having to really worry about how the kids are entering into the classroom. How long did they open up the doors? We don't have to really worry about these things because we know that we have a system in place that's robust enough that we're going to be able to take care of it. And there's also a part of these net zero mechanisms which actually improve the quality of life for people that are within these buildings. So you get an open up, if it's too hot, you can open up your window and have some cross ventilation that's coming through, that's bringing in fresh air. I think with COVID, we find that, bringing in fresh air is so important to just for the wellness of the building and for the wellness of the inhabitants. And I think it's really just great to look at those different things. And it's not only meeting the goals of net zero, but it's making things more sustainable for us long term. And it's also making a space that is better for the people. And, it's a really beautiful building. And too. So I think that by having such a tastefully done building, we're just going to love it and we're going to want to take care of it even more, and people are going to want to come and visit it. So all of those things, I think, help it to be even more sustainable.
Yeah, and I think thanks for touching on that. The first part of the passive house is passive, meaning that the focus is really not on active systems. Sometimes you can have buildings that try and leverage really complicated control systems and algorithms to try and optimize everything. And unfortunately, in real life, that doesn't always work. And sometimes it takes a lot of upkeep and maintenance. But really, this shift to a focus on passive strategies that just inherently work. There's not some sort of control algorithm or BAS or machine learning. It's just, no, you have an incredibly good envelope. And it's commissioned to be incredibly good, and it will be incredibly good, and you will not lose heat. It's not a function of a control sequence. It's just a function of the way that the building is designed. So it'll be there going into the future, I think is something I failed to hit on, and I'm glad you brought up.
And interestingly, some of these passive strategies with cross ventilation or daylighting and things like that are actually just very cost effective. And so the building itself is actually arguably for the performance at a reduced cost because of these integrated solutions.
Thank you all. And I do want to mention that one of the big objectives with this new building at Ryerson was to make sure that the systems are easier to maintain. So there are residential size systems. So it's not something that's so complicated that we can't figure out. These are systems that are similar to what you would have in your own home. And with that being said, now that we're getting technical and kind of in the nitty gritty, I do want to back up and just make sure that we talk about why this is important to our audience. Why is this topic something that they should care about or we should be talking about here? And I think we'll start off with Becky, if that's okay.
Yeah. I imagine that sustainability is a topic that is important to a lot of our audience members if they're here with us today. From a macro perspective, sustaining open spaces in Lake County is one of the greatest tools that we have in combating climate change. The Forest Preserve currently maintains 31,000 acres. That's 10% of all of the land in Lake County that is owned by the public and will be protected forever. Over 10,000 acres are in floodplains. 11,000 acres are included in Lake County's wetland inventory. 7,000 acres are forested. This land helps reduce the impacts of flooding. It improves water quality. It improves air quality. It provides carbon storage. It preserves the unique diversity of our flora and our fauna. It improves the health and wellness of our residents. The ecological and social benefits of land conservation are priceless. And constructing and maintaining buildings is directly responsible for a large portion of the carbon that's emitted every single year. Creating concrete, that's a lot of carbon. Just fueling the house to keep it the temperature you want to, that's a lot of carbon. And when the Lake County Forest Preserve Board determined the need for a new environmental education facility at Ryerson and a new maintenance facility at Lakewood, they wanted to pursue net zero so that they could provide this leadership as a conservation agency. At a micro scale, these buildings will produce as much energy as they consume. And this philosophy of making sure that we give back more than we take, or at the very least, not doing harm, is a philosophy that can be applied to pretty much every aspect of our lives. Here, the tools that we're using, a robust envelope system, higher R values, 6-inch insulation basically around everything, low carbon materials, reusing some existing materials, low energy and low water fixtures. All of these things can be applied to homes and businesses throughout Lake County. And quite often, these changes can be integrated as a part of regularly scheduled maintenance of a building. And if we're planning for sustainability, it's going to be so much easier for us to implement.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback that real quick, I think that this, I was listening to a podcast the other day and I heard, advertisements of companies now talking about this, about their carbon plan and about what they're doing. And I think that, not all of us may be on the front line of designing, engineering these buildings, but just knowing the language and understanding this sort of thing, it seems like we owe it to ourselves to know what people are talking about when they say net zero, to know what carbon neutrality really means, because a lot of people are going to be talking about this stuff and there's going to be a lot of buzzwords coming at you, and we're not all going to be experts on all these things, but just to sort of be able to know what makes sense, and maybe ask or demand things of others. If you're looking at a company, what is their stance on carbon neutrality? Are they committed, as committed as the Forest Preserve? So I think, yeah, again, we're not all going to be on the front lines, but just to have an understanding of what these words mean, what these topics are, because I think they're just going to keep growing and growing.
That's right, and it will become more commonplace. Right now, there's, I think, 12 projects in the state of Illinois that are pursuing net zero energy type goals. One project that has actually been verified as net zero after 1 year of operational data. So, I mean, this is a very visionary, cutting edge project, and it fills a very important role in demonstrating that this is possible. Others can do this. We're paving the way in a fantastic direction.
Agreed. Now, when we talk about sustainability, let's talk a little bit about how cost factors into this. How can we pursue sustainability goals while still being mindful of the costs?
Yeah, I think when you talk about sustainability, you focus on resource scarcity. I think money is also a resource and it's scarce for a lot of us. So I think, some projects have this complete dedication to net zero and it's net zero robust, but in most cases it's, how can we do the most amount of good with our limited amount of financial resources? I think that's really where things like a life cycle cost analysis, or just focusing on how best to spend our limited amount of resources to maximize our potential. How can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions the most with a certain budget? So I think, as much as we wish all buildings were just committed to being net zero and whatever it was, the chips will fall what they may, I think a big focus is, just optimization of the limited amount of resources that is capital.
That's right. And regarding those resources, a comment came up in the chat here, or in the questions, about embodied carbon. And I know that is something being evaluated on the project, and we really have to think of the time value of carbon. Over a typical building's life cycle, say 30 years, the amount of energy that's consumed just in operational energy is equivalent to the amount of emissions from building the building to begin with. Yet, the embodied carbon, the carbon that's embedded in all of our building materials, that's already been spent through resource extraction and manufacturing and shipping and putting it all together on site, those emissions are released today, whereas operational emissions are over the lifetime of the building. And so it's really important that we reuse materials, that we think about what the building is made of to begin with and try to reduce that impact to help fend off today's most pressing crises.
And at Ryerson, we are looking at, at Ryerson, we're looking at mostly a timber frame construction building. And so that really helps us. So instead of using materials like steel, which have a more carbon in terms of how they're manufactured and their overall lifespan, we're able to use materials that have lower carbon.
Great, thank you, everybody. We've gotten a question that I think will touch on the next one. So if we don't answer it specifically, I'm happy to answer it if this doesn't answer that question that just came in through the question and A segment. It says, so one of the things that the Forest Preserve is working on is our roadmap to 2025. And in our roadmap, there outlines a lot of conservation objectives and tactics that are going to guide our strategic plan over the next 5 years. One of the tactics is to work towards nature-based solutions for climate resiliency. What role does sustainable design play in combating climate change? And this important topic. I think we'll go to you first, Becky.
Great, thank you. Yeah, as a part of our district's roadmap to 2025, staff is tracking water flow regulations and flood control, water purification and groundwater recharge, carbon storage, air purification, and native flora and fauna. Together, these metrics will inform our strategies for stewarding healthy landscapes and protecting ecological services and habitats. Since Ethel Untermyer championed for the creation of the Forest Preserve and its establishment in 1958, the Forest Preserve has expanded, keeping pace with population growth, matching new development with new preserves to protect more acres and restore the balance between people and nature. I believe the continuation and expansion of this legacy is part of the solution to reduce the impacts of climate change. When Ethel began organizing for a countywide referendum, she was a 33-year-old homemaker with a 3-year-old son, Frank, and all they wanted was to find a place in the woods to explore. If we all had an ounce of her tenacity and foresight, imagine what we could accomplish together.
Yeah, this is, I was so eloquent, I hesitate to try and add on to it, but I think in a very practical sense, if I may go on the ledge too, the engineer in me just wants to think about this, the super practical part. That's a lot of times, when you're dealing with something like adding renewable energy to a grid, a lot of times, our houses are on a grid that we don't control. So we have a power plant down the street, or, ComEd in my case, that's giving us power. We don't really have a say over where that power comes from. It could be dirty, it could be clean. It just sort of is what it is. And I think that the steps that Lake County is taking to implement on-site renewables as part of this new Ryerson project onto the Welcome Center now, which is, I think, taking place this fall, which we're fortunate enough to be involved in. I think that really is sort of like taking the ball and putting it in your court, saying, source grid, you guys can lag as much as you want, not a problem. We're going to put renewables on site, and we're going to control, and we're going to generate clean energy, and we're not going to wait to receive clean energy from you guys. We are going to create clean energy on site. So I think that's a very practical means to combat climate change.
Yeah, this notion of resilience is very important. And, certainly as Becky mentioned, projects like this and like the restoration projects within the community or within Lake County have really served more than the Forest Preserve. I mean, the space itself, nature is diverse, nature is resilient, and the way we engage with that is really important. Having a project like this, with an educational component is really what we need to be doing for the future. And Steve mentioned earlier, about children and kids coming, people learning about these technologies, these strategies, and this possibility is essential, is absolutely essential, more than any single action any of us can take. Raising children to care, raising children to be part of nature again is really the magic in a successful future. And an important component of these types of projects.
Great, thank you all so much. All right, the big one. How can people apply sustainable design to their own homes and businesses? John, let's start with you.
I'm fortunate enough to be working in a discipline or in a space that, I feel that my everyday impact is making the world incrementally better. But I think all of us have that opportunity, at home. It's easy to, harp on somebody that takes an airplane ride. It's like, oh, but your carbon footprint is so big now, or that has a piece of meat. But what we need to do is, rather than thinking of being less bad, we need to do more good. And so it's kind of like writing off, an exercise regime because you had a piece of cake. It's like, well, you ate a piece of cake. That's great. It's good for us probably on a lot of different levels. But even if you go outside and exercise for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, that's better than nothing. And I think with everything we do, whether it be with the choices and decisions that we make at the grocery store, where we spend our money, how we deal with waste, how much waste we generate, just thinking about all of these decisions and wherever we have the opportunity to reduce our impact, I think we really should. It hit home with me with having children, and my kids now turn the lights off because of the polar bears. And so like they're starting to make these, they're young children, but making these connections with their own decisions with global issues. And that is both inspiring to me to keep doing what I'm doing, but really, again, points to the importance of positioning the next generation to really live in a way that, can repair some of the harm that we've already done. Steve mentioned, paying the debts of today, tomorrow. And there's a number of sayings that kind of point to that from, First People and just in sustainability, that we want to leave the place, pack it in, pack it out, leave the place you are in better condition than when you found it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Working on the 3-year-old turning lights off now is a fun task, but she's getting there. I think that, yeah, it ties in. It's everyone has to do their part, even the 3-year-old turning the single 15-watt LED light bulb off. We work on projects. We're fortunate enough to work on 600,000 square foot lab building that reduced its carbon footprint by 5,000 metric tons, and that's an enormous impact. But yeah, everyone has their sort of part to do, even if it's not that gigantic. It all needs to be done together. I think I'm a practical person, so going back to super practical, what can you do? I'm always amazed at the amount of money that's offered by local utility companies. So very, very practical level of, if you have a business or if you have a home and you want to put in a smart thermostat, you can go on ComEd is for Lake County, or if you guys are at, look up the utility provider, they have rebate programs. And may ask why they do this. It's not because they're out of their own nicety. They have money that they have to allocate to this, towards helping their customers save energy. So it's sort of there for us as customers to take advantage of, whether it's putting in a smart thermostat or replacing our furnace. So again, at a very practical level, see what's out there to help us make these decisions.
And I think too, we need to do what Ethel did, where we take something that we're passionate about and we advocate for change. I don't think that this is a problem that, necessarily our individual actions and, what I did yesterday and did I compost everything? I don't know if that's going to solve it. I think we really need to work with, our elected officials and make sure that we have, we advocate for systematic change. I also wanted, to point out, depending on what the scale of your project is, there's some things that, you can just integrate as you go, sort of upgrade. And, there's some things you can do and you can just make smaller changes every day that are a little bit better, like installing rain barrels or composting. But for larger projects, like Ryerson, or, if you're going to build a new home and you want it to be net zero, I really think it's important to get a trusted group of architects and engineers and construction managers on your team to really guide you through the process. I also think that if this is something that you want to do and you want a net zero home, I think pursuing a certification program, whether it's Passive House or Living Building Challenge or LEED, I think that that's so important because it really offers the homeowner the protection of making sure that everything is compliant. And then, if you can get into monitoring too, to just make sure that the way you're living in your home is also in accordance with the way that it was designed, I think all of those things are extremely important.
And in addition, Becky, to what you mentioned, the Passive House certification, a question came in regarding, are there any other courses or certifications that we would recommend to help people become well-versed in reducing existing building impact or to better understand net zero? Does anybody else have any tips or tricks for that?
I'm not sure I have a specific standard in mind. There's just a wealth of resources online about this. I'm not sure a specific standard that speaks to net zero. I don't know if you're aware of one, John.
Well, the ILFI Zero Energy is one. The Energy Pedal from the Living Building Challenge. Even LEED now has a LEED Zero certification. The common, people define net zero energy specifically in different ways, whether we're talking about the energy used on site or the amount of energy as sourced from the point of generation. If there can be combustion or no combustion, if you can buy RECs, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets quite nuanced. But what is common between all of them is this reporting period where you want to see 12 consecutive months net out to zero energy use. And so regardless of how you define it, I think that's the common theme. Locally, the Illinois Green Alliance is a local nonprofit based in Chicago that really promotes sustainable buildings and is our strategic plan. I'm on the board of directors for the Illinois Green Alliance. Our strategic plan is really about decarbonization in an equitable way across all of the 77 communities within Chicago. And so it's helping put it in within reach and making it viable. There is an event this coming Thursday called Limelight, where we give out our annual Emerald Award. And the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation is one of the recognized recipients this year because of the effort that the foundation has done in promoting net zero buildings in the region. And so I mentioned that there's about 12 buildings in Illinois that are pursuing net zero energy that collectively we know about. And I believe the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation is providing grant assistance to at least 9 of them. And so they have had their fingerprint in really moving the industry in this direction. And so it's exciting to see more and more projects taking them up on that and really trying to prove it all out.
John, I've gotten a couple questions about embodied carbon in general. And can you tell us how that fits into sustainable design and kind of define what that means?
Of course. If you think about, concrete, for example, concrete is responsible for 8 to 12% of global CO2 emissions. Steel, I believe, is another 8% of global CO2 emissions. And so right there, almost 20% of global emissions are from building materials. And so if we can think about how to, reduce the amount of concrete in structures or using wood or timber in this case, as opposed to steel for structure, the amount of energy and carbon released just from it building or creating the materials themselves is radically reduced. And like I said, that's very important to think about that impact up front because those are emissions today. And so, operational energy is very important and in many ways is a lot more tangible because we can see the meters and we can prove it out. The space of embodied carbon is a lot more gray. The industry is just now really starting to learn how to quantify and calculate it. There's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of things that we can be doing today to help mitigate that impact up front from embodied carbon in building materials specifically. But the same goes for, our clothing. If you buy or a bag from the grocery store, everything that we have around us has an embodied carbon. And so thinking about that, buying fresh produce locally as opposed to strawberries grown in South America and flown here has a different embodied carbon. And so seasonal food is one thing that all of us can do to help reduce our carbon impact.
And I think to add on that just a tiny bit too is we're always trying to draw sort of larger and larger boxes around the problem so we can look at a problem on a very micro level of, say, at a site level, are we net zero? Okay, well now let's look at our energy source, the grid we're talking about. Okay, let's draw a bigger box around it. Let's look at the source and the site. Okay, now this embodied carbon, let's draw an even bigger box around the problem. Let's look at it even more holistically. All the carbon that's going to do all these materials with the course of the life cycle of building. So it's zooming out more and more to try and get a more holistic understanding of our impact. This is just that next wide angle zoom out, and I think it's really going to make a ton of forward progress in our understanding of sort of cumulative impacts.
And Alyssa, I'd be happy to follow up with a few links and definitions and things like that that you can distribute to attendees if there's interest.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I know that we probably won't get to everybody's questions. So if there are questions that we don't get to, you feel free to email us at askaneducator@lcfpd.org. And we'll have Anissa put that in the chat for you. So if you have follow-up questions, I know where to reach these expert panelists, and I'm sure they'd give us a little bit more of their time if we asked. So I'm sorry if we don't get to your question. I think I'm going to get to one more question, and then it'll be time to kind of wrap up. There was reuse of materials was mentioned. Could you be more specific about what we mean by reusing materials?
Sure. In some projects, we're able to take existing road grade or concrete, and we're able to basically use that as new subgrade for other surfaces. So we're able to reuse some of that surfacing for other projects. To some degree, steel can be reused. So that's, I think, really good too. So you have to go through like a process likely, but you can do that. And then for this project, we're looking at wood, and we have the existing cabins, and we're actually looking at repurposing some of the existing timbers from the cabins to assist in some of the interpretive components for the new building. And then we're also looking at potentially doing some locally sourced timber from a different preserve. Sometimes we have trees that are pretty big and they die and they have to come down. And so instead of just allowing that to go into decomposition and leaving it where it is, and it provides habitat. So we want to have some portion of that, but what we can pull out and actually mill, then we can use those building materials inside the new facility too.
Great, thank you. Oh, sorry, John, go for it.
Well, I was going to say there are a number of resale shops locally. I mean, you can, from a design side, we think about how to take a building apart, and so that it isn't just demolished, but rather disassembled for material reuse. And so, using screws instead of glue, for example, just makes it easier at end of life to repurpose things. But it is a very important element of all of this.
And with that, I'm going to say a big, huge thank you for these three panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this inspiring conversation. And I want to give a special shout out to the Preservation Foundation and to Ethel's family and Amy's beautiful introduction that I think touched everybody. And if you enjoyed programs like this, we do have some upcoming programs that you can feel free to tune into. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Pleasure.
Thank you.